What is your nobody will ever believe this story? One time when I was a teenager I was playing pool with friends. The pizza arrived, or whatever, and I took one last shot, just as everyone was leaving, and sank like 5 balls. It was the single best move I have ever made in any game I have ever played. But no one saw it, and there was no way to take credit for it without sounding like a liar. I miss playing pool in bars. One time me and 2 friends met a couple of haggard looking biker dudes and asked if they wanted to play a game. One guy took a trick shot and imagine the white ball, 8 ball, and whatever ball he was sinking in a straight line in that order. Dude managed to make the white ball jump and skip the 8 ball and perfectly sink the colored one. Looking back at it, it's probably a really common trick shot, but to us young 20 somethings it was pretty awesome. Was doing a service call at an equestrian farm. I went to the bathroom in the barn to take a leak. The door was slightly ajar and the light was off. I pushed open the door and hit the light, only to see a goat dressed in a fleece vest eating toilet paper off the roll. He gave me this look like to say, "WTF are you looking at?" I turned off the light and left. I once threw the inside of a pen at least 9 foot clear across a room and skewered a fly that was annoying me. Legit, I felt like a ninja and have no way to prove it to anyone. Not gonna lie, it's probably my peak and it's all been downhill ever since. My ex, American, met him in the US, and my other ex, Dutch, met him 3 years later in Argentina, work at the same office in Amsterdam. They are colleagues. I found out cause I saw a FB post in which they were at the same office 2 years after me and Dutchy broke up. And I still live in Argentina. Also, some years ago, I was in a relationship with a guy. We lived together in a tiny apartment. The relationship ended in a terrible way. 4 years later, I started dating another guy. He takes me to his house. It was the apartment I used to share with my ex. And let me tell you, Buenos Aires is a huge city. I started out in the normal math CL, but until my teacher realized I should switch to the advanced CL, but because I got perfect scores on everything. Gee, we were just about to start the chapter about telling time when I made the switch. The advanced math CL, but already knew how to tell time. Me, I had all digital clocks at my house. SE, I didn't actually learn how to tell time till I was about to start high school and thought I should learn. Don't worry bro. I still can't sight read analog clocks. If I ever need to use one, I have to use my finger to point up to it and count the hours and minutes. I don't remember learning it in school and I missed some of 2nd grade, so I guess that's why. I've tried to teach myself but it just never sticks. So digital it is. Was lying in bed watching a movie and too lazy to move. Saw a small / harmless spider drop down from a thread on the ceiling, obviously heading for the far side of my bed. Even if it wasn't venomous, I didn't want to share my bed with it, but also didn't want to move. Not thinking it'd actually do anything, I reached out my arm towards it, but still quite a few feet away, and started waving my fingers at it in annoyance. To my absolute surprise, it immediately stopped its descent and actually retracted back up its line while I was sitting there in surprise. Took me a couple of seconds to realize that my hand must have looked like the most giant freaking spider he'd ever seen, standing on its back legs and waving the front 5 and the fuck off, or I'll wreck you dance. Watched an ant pick up its injured friend with its 2 front legs and ran away on its last 2 legs like a human would. Edit, I'm aware that ants have 6 legs. I just can't exactly remember what the middle 2 legs were doing, but I want to believe that they were just flailing around while the ant ran. My husband and son were watching ants filing into their hole with their loot. One ant was carrying a piece of wood, but couldn't get through the hole with it. It kept trying, holding up the line of other ants. Upon closer inspection, my husband sees it's actually been impaled with a sliver of wood. He picks up the ant and carefully removes the wood, and the ant fits down the hole. As someone visually impaired, this a much different world than the one I live in. My wife has an artifact, reflective metallic nose ring looking object, embedded in her lower left ribcage between the bone and fatty tissue. It was discovered after an MRI for unrelated issue. When I was a kid, I got a show box and filled it with some sand, a pile of sugar, and a few ants, like 3 or 4. I brought that box into the house and put it in my cabinet. I forgot about the box for like 2 days. When I went to check the box, because I thought the ants couldn't get out, I saw something that still seemed insane to me. But I know what I saw. A military style formation of ants. In a large rectangle. Sorted by sizes with the smallest ones in front. Like 2, might have been 4. Big ones in front of the others facing the formation. The large ones were facing away from the cabinet doors. The ants remained still for like 2 or 3 seconds then scattered in every direction. Got a hole in one playing golf by myself with no one else around me on the course. Most of my friends take my word it, but still give me a hard time saying it never happened. I've golfed since was 13, and was at one point a 4 or 5 handicap, had broken par etc. Played high school golf, and used to golf alone all the time, and that was my greatest fear. Looking back, I'd rather have gotten one with no one to see than being 30 and not having one. I've had 2 lip out, but what's worse is my friend Hoss Godawful got one 2 years ago at a tough course. Blind shot over water, we couldn't find his ball and someone decides to look in the hole and bam. Ducking Greg. My old boss has a Renex IVM brand. I saw it when she reached up to get something and panicked because it just seems rude to point out the branded skin on another person. I immediately recognized the symbol and it was surreal. I was immersed in podcasts and stuff about that at the time. I saw David Wenham, Ferrami, Low TR, at a cafe downtown. He was just walking by with someone I assume may have been a friend or partner. You just don't get celebrities where I live very often. I told one of my mates and he didn't believe me. It was him. My so was at a coffee shop many years ago in Amherst, MA, when a guy walked in, head down, and just sat on the stage. Pulled out a steel guitar and started playing. My so ignored it for a bit before he realized the guy was playing Zeppelin tunes. He walked up to ask the guy where he learned to play those tunes on a steel guitar. When the guy looked up, it was John Paul Jones. He just stood there speechless and then walked away to fangirl. The Owls. When my grandpa passed away in November of 2008, I was at my dad's house. The front yard is almost enclosed by pine trees. I kept hearing weird noises, so I decided to go outside and see what it was. We shone a light on the trees and was greeted by many pairs of eyes. There had to be at least 20 owls just hanging out in the trees. My grandpa had an interesting way with birds, and we had a very close bond. That was the only time the owls had ever been to our house. Until my mastiff passed away last year. I was home alone, brushing my teeth, when I heard the familiar sound. I thought I was going crazy, but no, there they were, owls in the trees. A completely different time of year. 12 years later, the owls keep watch. One day I noticed my dog standing at the GL butt door with something in his mouth. It was a $5 bill. We went to back and grabbed him a cheeseburger for a reward. The next day he was at the door with a $1, so we got him another burger. Figured it was only fair as he paid for it. This is pretty sad, but the night my mom died, I lived in the same house. Sleeping down the hall, I was asleep, and I suddenly woke up to a cold sinking feeling. I went into my living room to check on my mom and she took her final breath soon after. There was no way my body cold known as I couldn't hear nor see her from my room. Weird stuff like that happens more often than you think. My dad told me that he was taking a nap after school when he had a dream where he was talking to his grandfather and that he was telling my dad that he had to go. My dad then woke up to the phone ringing. My grandmother picked up the phone, and it was her sister calling to let them know my dad's grandfather has passed. Something similar happened to my mom. The night her mom died, she had a dream that she was sitting on her mom's lap and her mom was just hugging her and stroking her hair, and they sat in silence as they rocked back and forth in the rocking chair. When she woke up, she got a call from her sister telling her their mom had died. Seen as Tin, Governor's Lotta, Stranger Things, was in my bar one night. I was outside sneaking a quick smoke when he randomly walked up, hugged me, and said, "You got this." I didn't even recognize him at first until someone mentioned who he was, and I closed his tab. I was the only bartender and had been at capacity for 6 hours. My grandmother once spent a week in New York watching musicals with friends etc. She told me that she was walking across the park by herself and ripped her purse. Two very nice men helped her get her things together and then insisted on getting a pic of the three of them for her grandkids. It was seen as Ten and Elijah Wood. She had no idea. When I was a kid, 10, I went to the library with my sister, 12, and my mom. My sister and I doing the usual walking up and down the rows of books finding whatever. Eventually we split ways and a while later, I found my mom and asked her where my sister was. She hadn't seen her. So we go looking in the last area I saw her. She wasn't there. We go to another section. Nope. The next section. Nothing. We go to the other side of the library. Nothing. We check the bathrooms, outside the doors, and do another lap around the library. Nothing. We asked the library staff if they had seen her and they hadn't, but they agreed to start looking. About 30 or so minutes has passed at this point and we are starting to panic. We continued searching every last corner of that library and now we have started shouting her name. And others are as well. I'd say an hour into it my stepdad was called and he was on his way and he was even stopping cars as they left the library parking lot. This whole time there were 15 plus people looking for her and shouting her name. If she was in that library she would have heard us. My mom was at the front desk and she picked up the phone to call the police and my sister comes walking toward her from the kids section, completely unaware of what had happened. She said she was sitting in the kids section reading a book on skateboarding the whole time. We asked her how long she had been there and she said maybe 15 minutes. It had been over an hour since we saw her. I don't know what happened that day, but she was absolutely not in that library. We never went back. This is something that would have happened to me when I was a kid. I seriously zoned into whatever I was reading and would lose any sense of time and ability to hear anything specific happening around me. My parents and siblings would wave their hand between my book and face to break my focus to get my attention. I keep waking up to my lights flickering at 5:55 am. It's been about 7+ times and nobody believes me. Just moved into this house a few months ago. If it happens again and getting a camera installed, totally believable. Probably a local business automatically starting up some kind of machinery causing a power sag, like a miniature temporary but reoccurring brownout. If that's happening it means that the business likely made unpermitted changes to their electrical system. More likely it's a scheduled switch somewhere in the local system or ops house is very sensitive to voltage and amperage changes. I was at a friend's off-grid cottage with our combined amount of 16 dogs. It is a 1200 acre property with over 2 kilometers of basically off-roading to get to the cottage itself. With very poor cell reception. We were out for a romp in the woods to take out a problem beaver dam. It diverted a river from draining into the lake and flooding the road instead. So the dam is absolutely massive, like a good 20-foot drop on one side. So we finally get through enough that water started pouring through and my friend realizes her key fob is missing. Cue massive panic. The other key fob is over a 3-hour drive away. One of her dogs that was up on the dam with us stuck his head into the moving water and pulled out the key fob. Had we not both witnessed it, we would never have believed each other, and trying to tell other people what happened, with both of us able to tell the same story, is still met with disbelief. My sister and I shared a room in HS, and would get ready together most mornings without saying a word as we would just be too tired to interact. I was sitting at the vanity one morning and her on the bed, when I had a sudden urge to flick my scrunchie. All I said was watch this, and released the hairband across the room. I don't know how to explain this, but the scrunchie went right around the post of the bed, which was a sphere the size of a big fist. When I tell you, logically this should not have happened. We didn't even celebrate. All we could do was stare at each other puzzled. The silence was then broken as my dad walked in. I can only imagine how insane we looked as we tried to explain to him what just happened. Honestly, it's not that serious and this is my first post, but I think about this a lot. I once actually had to give legit CPR to a man when he had a heart attack. He was dead when the paramedics got to the house, but the medics took over and got him back. He died again in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, but they brought him back again. If it wasn't for me, he would never had a chance. Also, doing CPR for real is ducking exhausting. My dog and I were on a walk on our local college campus one weekend and he nosed a lilac bush that was apparently full of little butterflies. They all took off into the wind and then proceeded to do a perfect little spiral around me. I was so dumbfounded by them all that I was spinning in circles trying to see them all, which probably contributed to them doing a spiral. I was making air currents with my dress, but then it culminated with them landing on my head like a crown. Presumably because of the sweat. Butterflies are weird like that. My dog, by this time, is sitting nearby waiting for me to get over it and keep walking, looking majestic as heck with his own little smattering of butterflies hovering around his face. It was wild enough on its own. But then I hear this shuffling and vague gasping sound, and I look in time to see that there was some guy walking by a ways away who had apparently tripped over his own feet from staring. From his perspective it must have been surreal. I was wearing this fluffy, billowy red dress because I'd just gotten back from church, and I always walked my dog barefoot to make sure I never took him on surfaces that were too hot during the warm weather. My dog was this enormous wolf-looking husky mix, and at the time I had longish hair, so for all he knows, he walks out of the library and sees a legit Disney princess in a cloud of butterflies with a giant wolf standing guard. It was the most ethereal and fancy I've ever felt, even without knowing there was a witness. I mean, a cloud of butterflies materialized from a lilac bush to form a living crown. Question mark? It was breathtaking. I attended the only grade 7 to 12 school in my city. When I was but a small 7th grader, I went to get a drink of water and watched idly as some 12th grader in a Big Bird costume a la Sesame Street pogo stick down the hallway for a grad prank. Nobody believed me. My aunt had a creative writing CL butt in high school where she sat either in front of or behind Dwayne Johnson. I can't remember. She said that she never talked to him because he was such a jock. When my autistic brother was in the 5th grade he would bike to school every day. Has got that thing where he's bad at normal stuff, but amazing at weird other things. One day he asks my mom if he can skip school. She says no, without her knowing. He goes downstairs and switches his school bag with his Bugao bag, gets on his bike and dips. That afternoon my mom got a call from the school that he's absent. She puts 2 and 2 together and goes looking for him. She found him hours later in the Cowley, shirtless, with a tent set up, eating fish head caught from the river, cleaned, and cooked over a fire. He couldn't understand why my mom was upset. Mine. I woke up during open heart surgery and 100% believed I had a ladder match at WrestleMania. Not mine. My mum was only a kid during the troubles in Ireland back in the day. She was walking to school one day and someone got shot beside her. The bullet ended up ricocheting and went through my ma's leg. She went on to school and was too afraid to tell my grandparents. One of my friends has a similar story. His granddad, around 15, was walking around a town in Armagh with his best friend because they went north on a short day trip for something with their family. As the two were walking, a man sprinted up behind them and threw a live grenade down his friend's jumper. He obviously died instantly, but his granddad somehow survived with minimal physical injuries. Thankfully those days are over. OMG finally! Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. I was at a local jazz bar club. After enjoying a few cocktails I have the urge to use the ladies' room. So I walk in, plop my butt down on the towelite when suddenly a large woman burst in and proceeds to pull down her pants and spiss on the ducking ground. D. All while making eye contact with me and while my pee was still coming out. T. I was in shock. K. And all she said was, "Oh girl, I just couldn't hold it any longer." It was so surreal. L. I just walked out. T. Didn't wipe and didn't wash my hands. S. I was shook to the core. E. Edit. T. It was a one-person stall in a really old bar. R. If I remember correctly the door locked, but if you jiggled it enough it would open. N. It all happened so fast, and I had already had a few drinks lol, so some details are blurry. Y. This was about 3 years ago. Edit. I'm a girl lol. This happened in the women's restroom. A lady I work with wanted me to mow her lawn over the weekend and said she wouldn't be home. She gave me directions and said there's a green mower underneath her porch with a full gas can. When I got there it was empty, so I went to fill it up. Came back and mowed her yard. The gram butt was about 6 inches high and looked like it hadn't been properly taken care of in years. It took me hours because I pretty much had to go over everything multiple times. Monday morning she asked me why I didn't mow her lawn. I noticed people won't stop a person who's accidentally mowing the wrong lawn. I, a totally average nerdy teenager in the late 80s, hooked up with a famous blonde sitcom star a few years older than me in a New York City nightclub I wasn't even old enough to be in legally, and ended up having my one and only one night stand. Given the way both of us looked at the time, it's not worth telling anyone that I know it happened because they would never believe it. The one good friend I told back when I was in college, instead of responding with any sort of disbelief or claiming I was lying, instead said I never really thought she was hot. I saw a plane fall out of midair once. It just stopped and tumbled to the ground. Small plane, not commercial obviously. It wasn't too close, and I was at camp so didn't investigate, but its definition happened. I worked with a volunteer IMS here. I was the new guy, so I got all the grunt work. One accident scene. Head on truck and car. Man still in his seat, no seat belt, weird I think. Boss hands me flag and say, so walk in those bushes till you find it. Find what, I ask. Afraid. You'll know, he says. So I go walking in there and I stumble on something. Turns out there was a female passenger who had her head in his lap. And then the accident happens, her body went out the windshield and her head went out the side window. I puked and yelled, found it. Gross day. Very gross day. Tina Fey visits the town I live in every few years because her husband's family lives here. Just a tiny town in Ohio. I was in high school when I learned this because a few classmates worked at Dairy Queen and she would come in almost every day during their visit. I mentioned this to my best friend and bestie tells me that her grandmother is actually close friends with Tina Fey's in-laws. Another one is something that happened to one of my teachers in high school. This happened in the mid 2000s. This teacher has an elective CL Butto study song lyrics since he's really into music. Usually 10 students at most take the CL Butt every semester. They were analyzing lyrics from a John Mellencamp song. Can't remember which, since I heard this story 11 years ago and ended up writing John a letter saying how they really enjoyed the lyrics. A great surprise to the teacher and CL Butt was when John contacted the school. He was doing a show in a nearby city and came in the day before the concert and visited the teacher and students. He gave them tickets to his show for the following day and they gave him a shirt with the school name and mascot on it. John wore the poop during the entire concert. One time I managed to get a single strand of hair knotted around an inflamed taster bed on my tongue. Inadvertently. No clue how it came to be. Just that it happened and that no one will ever believe it. I drove up to the NBC studios in Burbank to try out for a TV game show. I was not picked. Close bracket. After the audition, I was wandering around and came upon the Tonight Show studio. There was no one around, so I went up to the stage and sat in the host's chair. Like I said, there was no one around, so I did not get a picture of it. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.